I was scrolling through YouTube when I rediscovered a video from the Komrade General titled You Got 45, specifically the extended version. In the video, it shows different allied nations and one caught my eye specifically, this being South Africa. And I wondered to myself, what was their role in World War II? As you know, they aren't really remembered in World War II. So yeah, that's this video. First, we shall start with the home front. By the time of 1939, this guy named Herzog, who was the prime minister at the time, wasn't all that big of a fan of Britain. Come World War II, he wanted to stay out of it. The parliament didn't really agree with him and deposed him for a guy named Smuts, who was in favor of Britain and joined the war on their side. Now at this time, there isn't much wartime industry in South Africa, and also no navy and no coastal defenses, which becomes important later. So due to some circumstances, such as other allied nations being preoccupied with getting invaded or potentially invaded by the Japanese entry into the war, South Africa had some problems to fix. Now, these aren't in any particular order, but I'd first like to start with production of war materials. Due to Australia, India, and New Zealand having to deal with the Japanese threat at their doorstep, South Africa had mounting pressure to produce many wartime materials such as clothing, ammunition, blankets, and even armored vehicles, among other things. Now, for a reason we'll get to later, these materials were made by women and non-white Africans. This was because the government only wanted to have white South Africans in the military to fight white Europeans. Something due to apartheid, I guess. Next, we move on to coastal defenses. There's a very real thought that Japan might try to invade South Africa as it was a strategic location. This wouldn't have been too unlikely as Japan had been steamrolling all of its smaller neighbors. However, the Battle of Midway pretty much put an end to that thought. The last thing I will mention is the South African Navy, known as the South African Naval Force. The Navy would eventually consist of a few boats such as the HMSAS Barbary, which was the first South African vessel to be attached to the British Navy in the East. South Africa did serve in a few different military operations, the first of which was North Africa in the Eastern African Campaign, where the South African Air Force played a major role in destroying Italian targets, mostly in Eastern Africa. South Africa also served in the Battle of El Alamein in North Africa, and one of their armored divisions fought battles in the Italian peninsula. The main one I'd like to focus on is the invasion of Madagascar. In 1942, both the British and South Africans attacked the French colony of Madagascar to prevent it from falling into Japanese hands and prevent Japanese submarines from potentially resupplying at a town known as Diego Suarez. This would be known as Operation Ironclad. The operation first started with South African Air Force pilots taking photographical surveillance. The invasion force would consist of 3 British brigades and 1 South African brigade, which was accompanied by a British naval task force which included 1 battleship, 2 aircraft carriers, and a bunch of other smaller vessels such as corvettes, cruisers, auxiliary vessels, and minesweepers. The first attack on Diego Suarez began on May 5th, 1942, in which the French were driven off. However, the South Africans did not land until the 25th of June. Don't you guys think you're a bit late to the party? In the time between those 2 landings, the Japanese midget submarine torpedoed the battleship and the task force as well as a tanker. This made the battleship return to a port in Durban for repairs. The island was captured by November 5th, with the Allies losing 107 men. As surprising as it may or may not be, South Africa did kind of fight the Japanese. They crewed a few different vessels, but more importantly sent one of their own vessels, the HMSAS Barbary, which I mentioned earlier in this video. The Barbary was given the task of removing Japanese boom defenses, which are defenses meant to keep ships out of harbors or straits. Once Germany was defeated, South Africa would send the HMSAS Natal and the HMSAS Good Hope to the east.